These are reactive dog classes, can be called anything, like dogs with attitude. I think that they call it that in East Bay. It's not on here yet on the account because I didn't plug it in. So they can be called dogs with an attitude. Reactive rover is a really common class. I call them difficult dog classes, which still was not a very good name because people thought that their dog won't come was a difficult thing. Feisty Fidos, anything like that. They can be called any kind of thing like that. So if you're going to teach these kind of classes, these are the things that I think are important criteria. Now that doesn't mean that other people think they're important criteria. They're just mine. And one of them is that the dogs should be dog reactive, not people reactive. Many people think that their dogs are not people reactive, only to get the dog in the class and find out that they are actually people reactive. But they shouldn't know. Now for me, I always required a consult first. So that was kind of part of the class. You got a consult, then you got a referral to the difficult dog class. So that by the time they got there, there was already some foundation work that had been done with the, with the dog after the consult and before the class actually started. So we need to have identifiable triggers. So is it other dogs? Is it big dogs, small dogs, black dogs, dogs with prick ears? What are the identifiable triggers? And the people need to know it. The other thing that people need to know from the word go is what their dogs look like when they're going to get aroused and what they look like from above and behind, like we were talking about last week. And that's a really important consideration that people cannot talk about in class. As soon as you're actually teaching a class with the dogs, you lose all your communication skills, all your communication with the clients. Or at least, let's say half of it. It's probably more than half, but as soon as a person is holding a dog, they're no longer able to listen to a person. You notice this, right? Just in regular classes, you're not getting through half the time. So we want identifiable targets, which are the other dogs, and identifiable triggers, which are what causes the dog to do it. Each dog should have been vetted thoroughly, and that again is consults in my in my case. I don't know whether or not what other people. What do they require for you guys, Marion?
To join for class?
Yeah, to get into one of those classes.
They have the first class.
So they don't require a consult before.
But the dogs can't be there.
Well, that's normal.
And they have to be referred to the class.
So they need a referral. Okay, yeah. So that's a really important consideration. So these are the goals of the classes. For me, the goals of the class are not to make a reactive dog non-reactive. Yes, that would be wonderful, but most of the time that's not going to be your actual identifiable goal. So it's like people say, well, when you're doing a consult, you say, what are your goals? And they say, to have my dog love everybody. And I'm like, okay, so that's a great goal. Let's make that, that's kind of like, I want to go to heaven. May not be practical, but Okay, so they need to be able they need tools. They need to be able to interpret canine behavior, body language. So what happens when your dog is upset? What happens when your dog is happy? What does a dog look like? So they need to be able to know what this kind of thing what this kind of stuff looks like. They need to understand what is happening with their dog's emotions. That if the dog sees another dog, that it's not just the dog deciding to do stuff. And most people tend to think that that's the case. They go, oh, my dog decided to bark, or my dog decided to lunge. And the dog really isn't deciding anything any more than if someone was aiming a gun at you and you're panicked. The decision is actually taken out of your hands. You're just responding with your gut. So that's what most dogs are doing when they're reacting to other dogs. Then a good goal is to be able to peacefully pass other dogs. This does not mean to be able to pass other dogs and have the dog meet another dog. It just means to be able to get past a dog. And that's the zen of dog training. In order to greet another dog, one must first learn to pass another dog. And what to do to intervene if something actually happens. So that was part of our classes that we ran, is like, okay, these are the things you do if the bad stuff happens. This is what you're supposed to do, or these are your options of what to do when a bad thing happens. So the first lesson is going to be the orientation, which is an introduction of participants in various problem behaviors. So what we used to do was to have everybody sit at a table, and each person would introduce themselves and their dog. And this took a long time. The dog wasn't there. But this took a long time, but on the other hand, it was really good because it kind of gave a support group air about the whole thing. And each person thought their dog was unique, and their dog is unique, but they thought their dog was unique in a bad way. You know, they're like, oh, my dog is Cujo, and then they find out the dog that's coming in is Cujo. Next dog is Cujo, and the one after that is also Cujo. So, but I think the funniest thing that used to happen was people would come up to me after this orientation and the introductions, and they'd go, are you sure that other dog is going to be okay with my dog? Yeah, I'm positive. We're going to be able. We never had an episode in the classes, and I ran them for years and years and years. We had incidents in other classes, but not in the difficult dog classes because everybody was prepared for how to be good. So we outlined class goals and the philosophy of reasoning behind the choices. So here's the thing. In the best of all possible world, you would not have to have a difficult dog class because it's really not a great idea to put a whole bunch of dog-hating dogs in the same room with a bunch of other dog-hating dogs because they're not going to be happy about all the other dogs in class. On the other hand, if you put a reactive dog in a normal class, then all the other dogs are going to go freaky because this dog is barking, and the people who have the reactive dog are going to be stuck behind barriers, and they're not going to learn a thing, and then they're going to feel like they're pariahs, and then they're going to go, I hate you, I hate this class, I hate everything about it, I hate my dog. So yeah, it's not usually a good idea to do that. So the reason you have difficult dog classes is because they end up being something that's good for the owners. And if the people work outside of class, they're good for the class. As Marion pointed out, and it's really true, in any class, whether it's a regular class or a difficult dog class, the dogs get used to each other. And when they get used to each other, they put up with each other much better. It's just surprise. Anytime you bring in a surprise, that's when you have issues. So you can get kind of a cozy atmosphere in difficult dog classes. It's certainly possible. Holistic approach to each animal essentially means that it's not just what you do in class and it's not just what you do on walks or whatever. The relationship between the owner and the dog has to be really, really well defined, and it should be that the owner is calling the shots. And if the dog is calling the shots, then it doesn't work very well. And of course, most people who have reactive dogs, the dogs pull on the leash. That's the first thing that you have to start working on. But it's kind of like what you were talking about. You actually have to fix things at home. So, you know, the People Empowerment Program, the PEP thing that I wrote, that's a really good one just for just make sure that who's deciding things at home, so that when you say we're going to do this, the dog has more of a tendency to listen as opposed to less of a tendency to listen. Recommendation for home behaviors, boundaries, again, management, routines, making sure the dog doesn't practice bad behavior. You could take a dog to class, they're going to behave well in the class, maybe take them home, and if they bark at the window at every dog going by, you're not going to get any better. Because the dog is practicing the bad behaviors, and it's just not going to get any better. And then a demonstration of introductory behaviors. So, I don't know, wait a second. Yeah, okay. So the equipment is really important. I do not require, we don't put a dog in a leash that's over 6 feet. We never, ever, 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 ever use retractable leashes. Ever. Let me emphasize that. It's funny, you know, I actually think there is a use for retractable leashes, but it's only if they're locked in place. It's just for people who have trouble holding their hands, you know, like this. That's pretty much it, though. So 6-foot lines for most exercises, long lines for some exercises, and those would be long lines for, we didn't ever, well, no, I was trying to think of the last class, we may have actually used them. So we do use a 20 to 30 foot leash for some things. So for collars, when a dog has issues, you never use a painful collar. That's just essentially the rule that I have anyway. So you would never put a pinch collar on a dog that has leash reactivity because you're likely to make it worse and not better. The freedom harness I like because you can actually attach it in 2 different places, and that's called a comfort halter. I like them because they're very comfortable. The problem is that if the dog pulls it off, the whole thing comes off, which is not good, although they may have changed it now. But a lot of times with some of these dogs, I'll actually put a gentle leader kind of thing and attach it to the harness. So you actually have kind of a full-on body thing for dogs. And freedom harness, easy walk harness is, the only reason I say easy walk harness is because they're the ones that are really easily available, but I don't like them because they're too loose in the front and they gap funny. So I'm not that keen on them. I like the sensation harnesses better. Martingale collar for some dogs. These are all large dogs, by the way. Small dogs, I think I mentioned it. I wouldn't put them in a class like this. I do not think they do well in classes like this. And even when I tried having a small dog, reactive dog class, it was bad.
They were bad with each other, or it just felt?
Well, they were bad with each other, but you know, the problem is that when you own a small dog and the small dog has reactivity issues, you just don't have nearly the amount, the number of things that you can do to help your dog because they're so small. So it was, and it was so noisy. It was really noisy. There are some things that I would do differently now if I ran it again, because the way I used to run difficult dog classes kind of started off being, separate the dogs, work on them individually, do desensitization and counter conditioning and all that kind of stuff. And I think most classes are like that. And by the time I finished doing them, I was not doing them like that at all. So, not that I didn't do any desensitization and counter conditioning. I just did a bunch of other things as well. So, and then muzzle desensitization if you need muzzles. Muzzle work is interesting. I don't know if you guys do it in your class, but the problem with muzzle work is that it makes dogs behave differently than they would ordinarily. As soon as you put a muzzle on the dog, they know that they don't have as much power. On the other hand, it was really good in some ways. What we did was we would put dogs on muzzles, so they all had to get desensitized to the muzzles. We'd put them on muzzles, and then we'd do them 4 dogs at a time. So we'd have 4 dogs actually go outside of the pavilion so that they couldn't get involved in it at all. And then we'd have 4 dogs inside. And each dog would be held by an assistant on a long line. So the dog had a lot of power and to go anywhere they wanted to, but they were muzzled and they were on a long line. And then we'd have the owners walk in a big circle around the outside of the pavilion. And what would happen, I bet you can figure this out, is the dogs would ignore the other dogs and follow their owners, which completely blew away the owners. They were absolutely sure the dogs would start killing each other. You know, they'd all race to the center and start killing each other. But instead, especially the German Shepherds, but most dogs would be like, I'm a little too worried not having you here, and I think I better follow you. I don't know that there's anybody over there that I really want to deal with at all. So you really got this kind. And so this was really good for the owners to know that their dog would actually choose them. If given the option, they would actually choose them. So that's actually kind of cool, right? And then we'd actually have the people go into the center and just look away from their dogs. So the people all looking at each other, which is really funny because they're all like this looking at each other. And the dogs would be outside not knowing what to do. And the dogs would all end up going and sitting outside right behind their owner. Again, most dogs do not actually want to engage with other dogs. They're using facilitated behavior. They're using their owner. They're behaving as though they would, but they really don't want to. And especially, of course, if you take away their teeth. But there was one dog. She was an Akita. She was a big girl. And you know about Akitas, right? They're very independent dogs. And she's like, oh, you mean I have all these dogs I can play with? So she wanted to jump on each dog, and she would hold them down and growl at them, and you know she couldn't do anything else. So I had the owners take that dog out because it didn't work. That behavior modification did not work for that dog. And the people were just livid. They said, well, how come all the other dogs can do it? But you know, your dog, you can't do it. Anyway, the interesting thing about the muzzle work is that everybody was a nervous wreck by the end of it, as you can imagine, but it really helped, you know. And I often thought if I had a bigger area that I could work in, that it might be a really good way to do a class, is to put muzzles on the dogs, do long lines so the dogs are not attached to leashes as far as they know, and really start to. So a lot of my class, the stuff that I did as I went on teaching these things, changed to try to get it so the dogs didn't think that they were attached to a leash all the time. But I have to say, the muzzles, I mean, I had people who were going to have nervous breakdowns. So, because, you know, you put a muzzle on a dog, and there's an emotional part of your brain that doesn't accept the dog is on a muzzle. It doesn't accept that the dog can't do any damage. And you can't leave them on them for too long, because especially depending on the kind of muzzle, but if they start hyperventilating, you'll have a bunch of overheating dogs. So we had to make sure that we had basket muzzles, that they fit properly. Some dogs can take them off. It is, in fact, Pia Silvani from St. Hubert's in New Jersey and I were always on the same page with this stuff, and we're both trying to find a muzzle that worked really well, because it was really hard to find a good muzzle. So the other thing that as time went on, the last 2 classes that I taught there, instead of doing the barriers, which we had actually made some barriers and all that kind of stuff, I started having people crate train their dogs. And that helped phenomenally in the classes, to have the dogs in crates. As I recall, in the last class, there was one dog that couldn't be in a crate, so we put him in a room. Somebody's office is in the pavilion. But every other dog had to be in the crate. Now, they don't have to, when they're crate trained, they don't have to be trained to be separate from you in the crate. You can sit on the crate. It's fine. The dog is in a crate. What happens when you put the dog in a crate is, first of all, when they learn to calm down in a crate, you're actually calming down the class. Instead of, if you've ever seen or participated, how many of you have ever participated in something like a difficult dog class? Just a few people. Okay, so essentially, when you put them behind a barrier, what you're doing is you're separating them from the class, but they can see part of it, and they can certainly hear everything, and they feel very vulnerable, and the people feel isolated. This is just what happens when you get behind a barrier, and that's just what it is. And then most of the time, the people end up spending a great deal of time trying to calm their dogs down and not listening to what the instructor has to say. They can't. They have to. That's just the way it is. So if you put the dogs in a crate, and we provided the crates, I mean, because we couldn't count on people to bring their crates every week. Just imagine them all. and for most of these dogs, you couldn't use a portable crate, because the dogs would rip their ways out of it. So we just had regular crates, and we put new towels in them every time. And so we did the first 10 minutes of the first class, we had the dogs, we were doing desensitization into the crates, but they were told they had to do this at home. And I would say we got really pretty good compliance. It wasn't perfect, but it was pretty good compliance. And so the crate training was great. Then the other thing we did was then we'd teach them to find it, and we'd have them do that at home. We have them do the head snap, which essentially is a name game. You say the dog's name, the dog turns, you say yes, you give the dog a treat, and watch, which is a little bit different from the head snap. And then we'd also have them practice the Zen down. So all these things were given, instructions were either given at the consult or at the beginning lesson, or both probably in most cases. So this was one of the dogs in the class. Now because he was already trained in the crate, they brought his portable crate. and he would sit there with his head up the whole time in the class. But he was so much better than he was when we tried to put him behind a barrier. And those people must have come to about 50 classes. I swear, they were great, great people. They came from Sacramento every week. Yeah, really, really nice people.
Did the dog improve?
Yeah, she got way better. He actually got way better, and he was a really nice dog. He just had no impulse control whatsoever. Not even a little tiny bit. So we then teach about different kinds of methods of training. I'm not sure why I say crate training here, but just different kinds of methods of getting to a target. So we actually would work on things like shaping and how to do shaping. I think that most people don't know how to do it, but it is, it's successive approximation, so it's pretty slow. So for most clients, it was a difficult thing for them to learn how to do. But they did it, and so this is that same dog, isn't it? No, this is another dog. This was I saw these dogs a couple of years ago. Not a poodle, a Portuguese water dog. Do you remember the Portuguese water dog? Yeah, they're great people with a really problematic dog. So we actually talked about classical conditioning and operant conditioning and crate games. And the best way for me that I know how to teach. Do you want me to talk about crate training at all?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. There are a lot of different ways to teach crate training, right? And most of them are fine. The way I found to be the fastest way to do it is classical conditioning. And essentially what you do is, so you've got the crate, let's just say it's here, okay? And you don't spend a lot of time trying to get the dog to go into the crate, because many of them don't want to go in. And the reason they don't want to go in is very logical. They don't want to get trapped. And also it's dark in there, so they can't see what's going on. So we always have to remember that if you're trying to go from light to dark, that the thing inside is invisible to the dog, so it's kind of worrisome. So when I first put a dog in a crate, I'll lure them in and turn them around so they're facing me. So I don't want them facing the back of the crate for any longer than they have to face the back of the crate. So it's a lure in, and then turn around, and then try to drop the hand so that the dog actually drops into a down, which doesn't always work. But you just turn around like this, and then you close the door immediately. Because half the time crate training, you spend, 3 weeks with the door open, and then as soon as the door closes, the dog goes, no, I don't do that, okay? So you've got this, you've lured the dog and you close the door, and then you start giving treats. So it's just like 1, and then you count to 5. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you put the treats on the ground. So it's on the floor of the crate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 2, 2, 3, 4, 5. 3, 2, 3. And then you do it every 10 seconds. So every 5 seconds and every 10 seconds. Then you stop giving the treats, open the door, and let the dog out. And don't pay attention to the dog for 5 minutes, because you're allowing for memory consolidation. Big deal, right? Then you do it again, and you're right there. You're not going anyplace else. So it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 2, 3, 4, and on and on and on. And by the time you've gotten to 1 every 30 seconds, you're putting the treat in. So you put the treat, then you get up and you walk around the room, then you come back, put the treat down in there again, get up, walk around the room, come back, put the treat in again, walk around the room, come back. Now you're up to 30 seconds, and after that it gets easy as pie. Because what happens is the dog has learned that it's really rewarding to be in a crate and that you're not going anywhere. And that's as far as we ever went with the difficult dog class, because they're not going to go anywhere. The people are not going to go very far, so wasn't interested in teaching the dog to be alone in the crate in the house, which is another thing entirely. Strider, my German Shepherd, could never be alone in a crate. As soon as I leave a room in the crate, he would rip his way out of it. Somehow, he'd get his way. He wrecked several of the portable crates, but he actually wrecked he opened up a plastic crate. So, I could never do that. And that's fine. He had separation anxiety. I didn't really expect him to. It's just that one time I was had to be gone, had to leave the office, and came back, and he's like, I got out. Yeah, here I am. I'm ready for you here, you know. So the crate is a really important thing, and giving them, you know, tools to actually crate train is a really important thing. Now then, what's her name? Does crate games? Susan Garrett. If you can actually download her crate games, and they're fun. They're really good. And I use those with when I teach a dog to actually go to the crate from afar. So you can teach a dog to target to a crate. So Aspen has to go into her crate when she eats every night, and the crate is all the way in the living room, and I'm making the food in the, well, not only in the night, both times she eats. So we just throw a kennel, and she shoots over to the kennel and backs up into the kennel. Here I am. I'm ready for you. So we use the crate training games for her to teach that.
The trainer's name again?
Susan Garrett. She's a really good trainer, and she trains really hard dogs. So she has had to do a lot of crate training in her past, because I think she had Jack Russell Terriers for a while. Now she has Border Collies. So takes the easy ones, you know.
The low energy.
Yeah, the low energy, low drive. Well, Jack Russell Terriers, you get 3 Jack Russell Terriers together, and one's going to be, you know, killed. They can be really, really hard on other dogs. So she was very good at separating the dogs. Okay, so we did the Find It. So this is Offie, and I'm doing I'm doing Find Its with Offie, who is a reactive dog. Presuming that it will work. There it is. Good boy, smell like that. Okay. So. So the whole idea behind Find It is that the dog seeks the thing and then looks to you. So you want them to look back at you after each iteration. So we're bringing a dog in now. He changed his mind.
Yeah.
So Offie was a dog looking for an excuse to not react to dogs. Whoops, come back. And I don't mind at all if the dog looks at the other dog. I want them to look at the other dog and then look back at me. I don't call it look at that, but it amounts to the same thing.
Do you find that makes some dogs feel better because then they're like, okay, I see that dog.
Oh yeah,
and I'm not gonna be
it's like if you
surprised.
have dogs that go crazy because they really want to greet people,
Yeah.
then having them greet people actually makes them feel much better. But it just makes it difficult in that early process. Yeah.
Ideally, do you want the dog to come back to you after you find it, or can they go off on them? So you want them to really...
I really want them in this kind of case. I actually want them to reorient towards the person, so that they're either looking for the treat or they're looking back up at you, or they're looking for the treat or they're looking back up at you. So some dogs, what they do is they'll look for the treat, look up, and then look back at you. And that's okay too, that's not a problem. But what you don't want them to do is to get the treat and then to stare at the other dog, because it doesn't take, well, as we know if you're working with reactive dogs, it takes a nanosecond for a dog to react to another dog. Even with Offie there, you can see that he would react very, very quickly to the sight of another dog. And that's what we don't want. So look here and then here. And they almost always look back naturally on account of because that's where the next treat's coming from. So they're going to do that, if at all possible. So the other thing that's really important in these classes is a head snap. And you can use that with a find it. So if you did a find it and then you said the dog's name, the dog's going to look back at you, then you can say yes, and then a reward can come immediately thereafter, which would be a really nice thing to have happen. So if you want a sound to get a head snap, that's okay. But essentially it should be that if I said Maribel, Maribel would look at me immediately. And one of the interesting things about clients is they very rarely use cues. They keep on always say the dog's name and they forget to say a cue. Well, in this case, you don't have to say a cue. All you do is need to say the dog's name and the dog looks back at you and then you can say, yes, you're a good dog. And you can make a sound or something like that, which is what I do, or any kind of sound. It could be a whistle, doesn't matter. It's what I do on the trail. I usually call the dogs by just clicking my tongue and they all turn around and come back at me really fast. That's because I can't remember their names very fast. I also, having multiple dogs, I just call them girls, and they all will turn at the same time too. Or boys, or dogs, or whatever. Just a collective noun of some sort that will get your dog, all the dogs doing it at the same time.
What's the difference between the head snap and the watch?
A watch is really a drawn-out head snap. Okay, so a head snap is just turn and look, and then maybe something else is going to happen. But a watch is you look at me, you keep looking at me. I actually don't use it that much for the reactive dogs because what I found over the years is that if the dog is doing a watch and the person is panic-stricken, you don't want them looking at the person because the dog loves the person's going. That's not good. So a head snap is fine, and then another behavior like a find it or whatever. But I don't want an elongated watch. It's really hard. Now, if you're doing obedience with your dog and you're one of these people who likes the dog to look up at you adoringly the whole time that you're walking and walk into things, you've seen dogs that do that, right? They go crashing into things because they're looking at the owner and the owner's like, this is really great. This is what we were talking about earlier. This is that slave thing, Oh, I just love you. I think a dog should be able to explore the environment just like I want to explore the environment. But if you really like that, and by the way, if you really want that, if you want to have a dog stare up at you, one of the best ways to do it is stick a bunch of cheese in your mouth and spit it down at him. And what happens is you get this dog is like. That's what people in confirmation do. They put liver in their mouth right here. And they bring it out and they spit it at the dog, and you get these wonderful, the dog is like this, and they just want this, so they spit. People in dog shows do awful things. I mean, gross. to me, that's just gross. Liver is not a good idea. Cheese I can do. So if you want to do a watch, though, you would do a head snap, and then you might say good, or you might just say watch after that. So you would kind of go Aspen, watch. Good, and then you count to 2, and then you say yes, and then you give the treat. So the longer you want the dog to do the behavior, the more you withhold the treat, so that the dog ends up, the sun is right in my eyes. This is just, no matter where I go, and if I do that, I'm doing this. So it's that's a good idea. So, the longer you want a dog to do something, the more, the longer you delay the treat, or if you're going to use clicking, then you delay the click in the treat. If you're going to use a yes, then you delay the yes in the treat. So it doesn't matter what you're doing, you just delay it, and then you will actually get, you'll get a longer behavior out of it.
What you were talking about anticipation last week?
Yes.
I was trying to have my 6th graders this week, and it worked so well.
Oh yes, what did you do?
Because on Friday afternoon, they always get to play a game at the end of the day. And so I wouldn't tell them what the game was at first, and I didn't put it up on the board, and they were better than they've ever been.
Oh yes.
I said I learned on my dog page.
Well, that's excellent, yeah. It's anticipation, okay. So it's kind of, the same kind of difference between the name, game, and watch is the difference between wait and stay, although it's a little bit different. Wait is pause, right? Wait means if you're going someplace, you pause, and then I'm going to let you go through. So, for our purposes, wait is something along the lines of a wall just came down right in front of the dog, and stopped the dog. So wait is a really nice exercise. I use it all the time. It's just absolutely great. Stay is different. And stay is something that I think I've mentioned before that people don't work on enough. Stay builds impulse control. And in the case of difficult dogs, what I prefer, doesn't always work, thank you, but what I prefer is for the stay to be something that is released by a touch. So if I was going to put a dog in a stay, and so the dog goes into the stay, and then I'm going to walk around, not very far away probably, because you always work duration before distance. I'm going to walk around a little bit, and then to release the dog, I'm going to touch the dog on his head and say release, or okay, or whatever your release word is. And the reason you do that is to build, I don't want to say contentment, but build knowledge that the dog will not be released from his or her stay until you have returned and you've actually touched the dog. Can you see how this would make a dog actually feel pretty solid after a while? If you're gonna, you're not gonna be able to get up until I'm touching you. Because otherwise, if you are doing it with your voice, then they're going to be going, okay, I'm gonna get up any second, I'm gonna get up. And when you're working with difficult dogs, when you're working with reactive dogs, you're trying to reinforce relaxation. This is a really nice, very, very delicate way to work on relaxation. This is just having the release be a touch. And my former assistant trainer, Mandy Kennedy, she was the one who introduced me to this. And I've been using it ever since. I think it's a really great way to work on a stay. Now you can give it another name. So you can say that's going to be a settle. And the settle is going to be released only with a touch. And that's fine if your dog already does a stay. But in the case of dogs that have reactivity issues, I want to work on a 5 to 10 minute downstay. Do you know how long that is? It's really long. I used to work in radio, and 60 seconds is 90 words. So that's a lot of verbiage, and so you just have to, first of all, people think of a stay as being something that lasts 2 or 3 seconds. That's what most people think a stay is. And they don't get that stay anyway. It doesn't ever happen. So it's important to actually do that. So in a class situation then, if you're bringing the dogs out of the crate and you're having them, do a stay, then you might use your gates, by the way, something to block off people. But then you have the dog do a stay there and then to go back into the kennel, in the crate. The crate is not used for a stay at all. It's that has to be in a down or a sit. Now, we never make a dog do a sit stay for more than a minute because it's hard on their hips. And for some dogs, we don't make them do a sit at all. Like I've had greyhounds in classes, they don't have to sit because it hurts to sit. It's not comfortable for them. So there are some a dog that has hip problems, knee problems, or whatever, sometimes sitting is really hard for them. So I would never make them have to do that. We used to back in the old time, but I don't anymore. So you want a high expectation that the dog is going to be able to maintain the self-control for a few minutes. And you start off first in the house, then you go to the yard, then you go into a car. And the car is cool, especially if you have an SUV. So I expect all my owners to get an SUV. My owner, the Golden Retriever, yesterday they had what is it, the really, really expensive one? Tesla. I was going to call it a Vesla, and I knew that was wrong. They have a Tesla, so he's opening the doors like this, and like this, and I'm like, well, this is not a good place to have to be able to work on a stay. Anyway, so I did have one client who actually ended up being a trainer, And this was her major way of working on reactivity with her German Shepherd. Is she would take the dog in a crate in her SUV to a dog park, put the dog on a downstay in the crate, open up the back, open up the door in the crate so the dog could actually see out. But the crate that was really for feelings of security. And then she'd do stays at the dog park while the dog is watching all the other dogs play. And it really helped the dog, because now the dog was beginning to understand that she had to maintain control even though there was a lot of activity going around. So a stay is not a stay until there's a lot of activity, right? If you can do a stay, in fact, we get that all the time. In fact, you were talking about it. You said, well, Mick is really good unless, unless there's another dog around, which means he's not very good. It means that he has the behavior, but it's not proofed. And proofing is something that is difficult to do. And in the case of Mick, he's going to be getting a lot more exercise just running. So weight is used when the dog is instructed to stop behind an invisible barrier, and there's no other behaviors mandated. In other words, they don't have to sit down. They do, but a lot of dogs will do it anyway. If you say wait, they stop and sit. You don't punish them for that. It's just that isn't part of the exercise. And the way you teach it is to start by having boundaries and then end up with no boundaries at all. Okay, so this is the Aspen learning how to do a weight. This was in Santa Cruz. All right, we are going to work a little bit on weight at the door. And all right, we are going to work a little bit on weight at the door. And one of the best ways to do it in the beginning is to just walk over to the door, tell the dog to wait. Okay. That's your finished product. All right, so to begin it, you go Aspen, wait. Wait. Okay, good girl. And you can also actually reinforce the dog when she's doing her wait. Walking towards the door. Wait. Very good. Wait. Good girl. Wait. Good girl. Okay. Good girl. So that is wait. Aspen, go up on the up. Wait there. Good girl. Then another way to do it is to actually teach the dog that going through the door all by himself is not what he wants to do. So are you ready to go? Let's go. Oops. You actually let the dog go through the door. You count to 5. Then you let him back in. Hi there, good boy. Are you ready? Let's go. Good boy. So in this case, I didn't even have to give him the cue. I'm going to reinforce him. And the little dog in the chair. Wait. All right, Luke, let's go. Good. Let's try it again. Okay, let's go for a walk. Good boy. So actually, I would rather have him wait a little bit further back. That's a good boy. Very good. Okay, come back here. Good boy. Come on back. Good. Oh, well, if you want to go, but you're not going anywhere, because you only give them like that much leash. So they're outside, the door is closed, and they're going, this is really tedious. I don't think I can cope with this. And then after a bit, they just learn to just wait for you. And you don't have to say nasty things to them. You don't have to leap in front of them. You don't have to do anything like that. It's just kind of like, oh, you went in front of me, and what you wanted to happen didn't happen. Oh, my gosh, how sad. Okay, so with a sit and down stay, when the dog sits, you don't use a cue. I mean, you don't use a marker. So if, you know how when you're teaching at first, you say sit and everybody goes yes, and then the dog expects a treat because yes means the treat is coming. In the case of it, you need to have the dog sit and not say yes. And I see an awful lot of clients who every time the dog sits, they say yes, and then the dog immediately gets up because they think the treat is going to come. So you don't want them to do. So once you've taught sit is sit. It doesn't mean sit. No, sit is sit. And so then you can use either the ground technique or the airplane technique to maintain the sit. So the airplane thing is like when you're doing this and you have the dog go into a sit, and the ground one is when you put something on the ground and then you bring it up and give it to the dog. In the case of a sit and a stay or a down stay, I don't give a reward to a treat until the dog I give the dog a release a treat when the dog is in the behavior. As soon as the dog has finished the behavior, they no longer get a treat. So what you want is for them to not want to get up, right? So if you do a sit and then you go, okay, and then you give the dog a treat, what's the dog going to be anticipating the whole time? Yeah, that they're going to get a release and they're going to get a treat. Well, they want to get up anyway, so that's part of the reinforcement. But also the reinforcement is getting the treat. So if you give the dog behavior that you want, this does not go for come or heel or anything like that. These are just stationaries. Then what happens is the dog starts to learn to relax in that. And again, what you might think you're doing in a difficult dog class, you might think you're trying to desensitize the dog to having other dogs go near them, but what you're really working on is self-control. I had never quite thought about it that way, but don't you think that's it? In the end, that's what you're doing. So these are bits of self-control that you want the dog to have. And that's why these things are really important at home, and they're also really important to practice in front of other dogs. So then you do that for a sitter, you do that for a down. Again, the down can be for a really long time. Okay, so the Zen down is when the dog is lying down, you roll the dog over and you put your arms on the dog if you need to, hands if you have a little dog, and you hold the dog down and you just use enough pressure to keep the dog in place. So just imagine doing this. If you have a nervous dog, just imagine doing this to your nervous dog, because it can be very difficult at first to do it. And you'd always do it on a very comfortable place. You don't do it on the sidewalk, unless you have a dog that's got a really, really thick coat. And then you hold the dog there until they appear calm. And if you can feel their heartbeat, that's really a good thing. So the heart should start to slow down. And then when you release the dog, you don't go, okay! That's not how you release this exercise. You release this exercise by just giving your okay and just letting the dog go up. When I did this with Strider, I actually had to lie on top of him. He was such a nervous wreck. It was so hard for him to do it, and by the time we'd done it for 2 to 3 months, he could get up no problem at all. He could lie down, get up. He was really, really calm. Luke is pretty much the same way. When I first started doing it, his legs were like that. So he's lying down and his legs are like this, like I'm not having a good time here. And as he kind of let me take control of him, he got much, much better, and so then he would do it very well after a while. So I had a client who had Great Pyrenees, and he was pretty reactive. And I think she ended up putting him on Prozac. I don't remember how much effect it had on him, but he was really good at the Zen down. Once she got going on the Zen down, he got really good. So after they finished the class, she also became a trainer. Anyway, she emailed me and she said that he'd been going on a walk. She'd been going on a walk with him, and he saw another dog, and he barked and lunged, turned around and did his end down. Because that's what we always did in class. As soon as there's any level of reactivities, one dog really starts to bark, everybody was to, if the dogs were out of their crates, everybody had to do a zen down with their dog. So it was a way to take the dogs back down again. So he really generalized that. He got it really well. It was actually very cute, you know. He was a difficult dog. So here's Lukey doing a zen down. See, Luke down. Good boy. So you want to actually just kind of lower the dog. Good boy. And then hold his head down. Hold his body down until he completely relaxes. That's a good boy. Good. And then you can release it when he's relaxed. So I can't release him until he relaxes. Okay, good boy. Very good. So that's a zen down. And I don't know, people really liked it because it was nice and relaxing for them to do. Now, there's a trainer whose name is escaping me right now who does stuff with, she puts, I don't know if she still does this, she would put smear food on the floor. Any familiar with that? It was a big, in the reactive dog classes, this was a big thing that people were doing all over. They would take a mat and they'd mess up some food, just get kibble. The idea was just to give them something to do. And to me, that was not going to work because the dog is stimulated eating the food and not paying attention to the other dog. So as soon as he finished the food, he was going to start doing it, or he would even stop himself from feeding the food. So this is a little different because what's happening with this is you're really trying to help the dog to learn to relax when you want the dog to relax. So we're actually looking for relaxation rather than distraction, I guess is what it amounts to. So then when we do the clinic style class, the dogs are in class, they're crated if at all possible, barriers if necessary. Each dog is brought out separately for individual assessment and recommendations. So this was done in a friend's yard. Polite walking techniques, that would be attention walking, target walking, wetting marked walk, and the slip leash method. Those are the four different methods I have a tendency to use when I'm working with reactive dogs. And then we always do a choose to heel, which is always fun. So choose to heel or choose to follow essentially is, I could actually pull it up on the video. I don't know if I have time to do it, but choose to follow is where you put the dog on a long line, and then the dog walks, and you hold the long line, but the long line's on the floor. And the dog starts to follow you, and when they catch up with you, you reinforce. So you're walking all over the place like this, and the dog is maybe following, maybe not, but if every once in a while they follow you, they catch up, you give the dog a treat. So what you're doing is saying, this is what I want. I want you to follow me, I want you to follow me, I want you to follow me. But you're not telling him, and it's a long line, so it's on the floor. Slip leash method is or slippery leash is where you're walking with the dog, so you're walking like this, and the dog starts to go ahead of you, and you let most of the leash slide out of your hand, and you turn around, call the dog back to you. So it's a kind of a method of saying, your job is to watch me, my job is not to watch you. So it really works well after the choose to follow, because it ends up teaching the dog not to rely on the leash, which is a nice way to because they always rely on the leash. Wedding march walk is exactly what it sounds like. Heel. 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 And they sit every time. So it's heel, sit, heel, sit, heel, sit. And if you're really into working with your dog, then you always start off on the same leg. You start off on the left leg first if the dog is sitting on the leg, and the right leg first if they're sitting on the right. And the reason you do that is so they can follow that leg. I really think you need to teach dogs, or dogs need to be given a chance to read your body language, and this is one way to read your body language. Have you noticed that most people just expect dogs to know what they want without ever really giving them any kind of consistent cues? Well, this is a nice consistent cue. You know, it can be a verbal, but it also can be just, I'm going to step off on my left leg, and when I do that, you come to me, you come with me. And when I do step off on my right leg, you stay there. But most people don't do that, and it's a really good way to teach a dog to follow along with you. So attention walking looks dopey, but is very, very effective. Attention walking is that you have the dog in front of you, and you walk backwards. So you're like this, you're walking around, and then the dog is following you because now what do they have? They've got a target, don't they? They have something that they're following. So it's right here. We're following you, right like this. This is good. And then as they're following you, you're doing really well, you suddenly start moving forward. So they're here, okay? And then you move forward, and they shift over to the left side or the right side. And then you're walking like this, and then they're walking next to you. And at this point, you can reinforce. And then you go like this, and they're back following you again. So it's a very foolproof way. It's a really nice way to start off walking techniques. Is backwards and then forwards, and backwards and forwards. And you do have to figure out find out whether there's anybody behind you that you might run into, because that might not be a really good idea. So those are the different kinds of, and target walking is another one that is really cool. You actually take a piece of treat, or maybe even a plate, and put some treats on there. And I don't know if you guys are still using this in the classes, but essentially the dog is going to go get the treat. And in order to get the treat, they have to walk quietly beside you. So they start to walk, you start to walk, and they go, I'm walking good, I'm doing well, I'm doing well, I'm doing well, I think I need to get the treat. And then you go, oops! And you take them all the way back to the beginning again, and you start again. And after a while, the way they walk is like this. And then they get the treat, and everything is good. So again, what are we teaching? Impulse control. Everything is always about impulse control. You can have the treat, but you have to be calm before you actually get the treat. So it's all these methods are good for that. So now we've got, choose to heel, work on a minute, a sit and a down stay, counter conditioning in various locations. So counter conditioning is not going to be the most important part of this class. What's going to be the most important part of the class is operant conditioning. Looking at me, paying attention to me, doing stuff. You're just doing it in concert with a lot of other dogs who are under a lot of stimulus control, or they're under management at the same time. So there's an awful lot of that goes on. And then when you bring out a dog one at a time, you get all these kinds of, okay, this is what your dog is doing now. In our classes, when we were doing the clinics, we'd always have 2 or 3 really nice dogs that you could bring out at the same time, so the reactive dogs could work with the nice dogs. And then you add scenting scenarios. So when the last class I taught, Marine Humane Society, and the second to the last class I taught, we did scenting games. So we did the full-on thing. We did boxes, and we had each dog learn to go for boxes. And then, so each dog would do it on their own in the class. And then on the graduation day, we took them all outside, and we had them all do it one at a time, but they were no longer in their crates. I think 1 or 2 might have been in their crates, but others were not in their crates. And they got to do the scenting game, and the other dogs had to stay in a sit stay or a down stay while they were doing it. And everyone loved it. Doing nose works in reactive dog classes is so good, because the dogs are given, not only are they given something to do, like find it, they're actually taught how to use their nose. In the same way that, have you guys taken a Noseworks class? Or do you know anything about a Noseworks class? Because what it is, it's scent discrimination. And first of all, it's very, very easy to do in the beginning. You just, can you find this treat in a box? well, yeah, you can find this treat in a box. And then after a while, it gets harder and harder and harder. So those are things that I think are really important for working with, you're giving them a job that's other. So I think what happens in most difficult dog classes is people are working so hard on trying to teach the dog to avoid other dogs or to stop reacting to other dogs, that if you change the way they look at it and start go, okay, well, maybe the way to look at this is to say, you pay attention to me and pay attention to the stuff we're doing together, and the other dogs are irrelevant. And if you can get the dog to that level, you're good. I think then you would be fine. But it is difficult to do. There's no question. Okay, so I think,
Do you think that training is more effective in a class or individually?
I think training is more effective individually. However, I also think that people like having other people that are there. And I think probably the most effective thing would be to have 2 dogs in a class, 2 or 3, rather than 6 or 7. But that it's really hard to do that. So, but you really want to pay attention to the individual dogs. Yeah.
When I walk Cindy in the neighborhood, not in open space, I'll do the watch me if I see a dog coming. And he will really watch me, be right next to me, will go by fast. Could I practice the wedding with him, those steps, when make him sit, and then,
You could do that.
or would that give more opportunity
How much does he watch you?
constantly?
He watches you all the time?
Yeah, he's so
Then yes, absolutely. And if you did it with Cindy, you could go, you probably say, let's go, right? So it's let's go, sit, let's go, sit, let's go, sit, let's go, sit. So now he's got to actually, figure out
Yeah.
where you're going. So it becomes a funny little game. So one of the things,
that might give him more control, because we whiz by
yeah.
the other dogs. It's
Yeah, so
hard.
you might be able to do that.
Okay.
And I did forget something that when Tricia and I are doing the clinics that we almost always do, which is body work. So we actually try to teach the dogs to know where their body is. We'll teach them to you use a lure and you have them go in between your legs and then around your legs and around your leg the other way, and then you have them right here and you walk backwards. So they start to actually figure out where you are in space and where they are in space. And then a lot of massage, a lot of figuring out what the dog likes in the way of tactile stuff, what works for him tactily. I'm certainly not above doing things like pointing out to a dog that they're supposed to be paying attention to me by poking them on their butt. Hello, I'm the most important person here. I'm the one who gives you your food. So, but body work is really nice. Tricia's got some great things because she used to work with horses, and you do a lot of body work with horses. So this was it's a really fun thing to do.
How many sessions did you have in your clinic for you?
We in the clinics were individual. Well, no, we had
Class, I guess.
usually 8.
8, so including the first one where the dogs
Yeah.
went there.
Yeah. And people, I always worried that we're making dogs worse instead of better. So I'd always talk to the people afterwards and find out whether or not they thought they were getting, and they all liked it and they all thought that they got it better. I still don't know how much of that was, I got to talk to a bunch of other people who also have problems with their dogs. I think it could have been, certainly a certain amount of it was that. But they did say, and I remember we had one of the teachers who taught difficult dog classes was a really slow-moving person. I mean, the class moved really, really slowly. She did lots and lots of desensitization and counter conditioning. And I took over her class at one point. And at MHS at that time, I would monitor the classes, but they got to do whatever they kind of wanted to do. We had certain things that had to be taught, but each individual teacher had a lot of control over what their classes were going to be like. So her classes moved very slowly. And I remember taking over, I think in week 4, and the dogs had never come out from behind the boundaries. So I said, okay, let's get them all out here. And so we had to get them moving. We had to get them doing stuff. And it actually was really funny because they're all like, oh! Yeah.
It's strange because that was one of the moments I was assisting.
You remember that class, huh?
And it was like a funeral in there. And the people were like struggling with all these dogs behind these barriers. And you came in and all of a sudden it's like, I went, wow. All the dogs were out and the people were energized.
We got them moving. They weren't, none of the dogs in that class were, I kept on going, why are you in this class? You guys are all really good.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was amazing the difference when the dogs can kind of interact and see each other. And,
Yeah, and people weren't kind of like, because when you're doing desensitization and counter conditioning, everything has to be really low level because you have to, there's so much thought that has to go along with it. And in this case, it's like, no, I'm going to make you people more interesting to your own dog. And they did have a good time. And I remember getting one of the write-ups afterwards saying, the fourth class was really fun. Because we're not at a funeral. Actually, it shouldn't be a funeral. And I think it's really important in any class you teach. And for those of you who teach classes or teach people, you know that laughter is so important. If you can keep people happy, then their dog gets happy, and they end up being able to accomplish an awful lot more than if you're not, if they're miserable, at least in my opinion. So now the final thing that we talk about in class, I think we've already covered it here, is how to, what to do if another dog comes running at your dog. And one of the best scenarios is to turn around and walk the other direction. Another thing to do is to go like this and stop a dog from coming at you by actually taking charge yourself of what's supposed to be happening with the, what's supposed to happen between the other dog and you. The defend umbrella is a really good thing, but the problem is that it's hard to carry unless you have a backpack or something like that. So there was one class I remember that we did where everybody in the class seemed to be pretty scared. All the people were really scared I think this was a level 2, so we were outside. And the people were really scared of of talking to other people, because the other people, the other dogs were scary to them, and they didn't know what to say to the other people. And so what we did is we did scenarios where the assistants and myself would go up to a person and say, "Hi, can I meet your dog?" And they didn't want you to meet the dog, and so they had to go, "No." And it was really hard for them to actually verbalize, "No, you can't come any closer." So we came up with phrases that people could use. "Please stop. My dog is not well. My dog is a jerk. My dog is, whatever." I use "my dog is a jerk." That's what I say about Luke. He's a jerk, so it stops people. Or like John Rogerson said, "My dog has a strange anogenital disease." But you have to say it in a British accent, in order for it to have the kind of impact it should have. So we actually did. We had scenarios where, okay, you're going to put your dog on a sit, and then now you're going to talk to a person. And so they had to do that. And those are all really practical things that I think that if you're going to teach a reactive dog class or you're going to work with a reactive dog, those are the things that are really important to be able to do. Okay, so that was the class. And again, I want to talk to you because you already, did anybody else ever taken this class online? I don't think so, because I'll talk to you about it in a bit, okay? But if you have any questions, you can always email me about it. So any last minute questions or yes?
I have used one with your dog is rushing towards you to throw the treats, but they're so over the top, they ignore the treats. So now I always need to check where there's a big stick. So if I see a dog.
Max, can you say a little? I didn't hear you.
Oh, I've used when I'm having a dog rush at my dog.
Right.
It's coming from another hill or another road. I've tried throwing the treats.
Right.
Find it, the treats. They're so over the top by then they don't see the treats.
Right.
So I always look now because I know when another dog is coming where there's a stick that I can wait. I know I can go back a few feet and get a stick, or I'll carry one with me when I stop to throw the chuck-it for the dog. So I have it there.
Well, you have a chuck-it.
Well, I've got a short jacket. I've got one of the real short ones.
Oh, you got the little bitty one? Yeah. Because your chuck-it is, it'd probably be pretty good for that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah.
Yep. the treat thing only doesn't always work. Although what you do with the treats is you grab the treats and you act as though they're rocks. You're not acting as though they're treats. They are treats.
Yeah.
You can, for some dogs, you can just say treats and then they stop. If it's a Labrador, it'll stop. There's no way that it's not going to stop. But for some dogs, you go, no, stop, go home, and you throw the treats.
Yeah.
So you're actually giving a cue that sounds mean, but you're throwing treats at the dog.
Yeah.
So you'd have to do both at the same time.
The go home's good too.
Yeah, go home. Go home works an amazing amount of
Yes.
time. Just it's like, oh, okay. I'll go home now. This is what I'll do.
Yeah.
Any other comment? Yes.
I was just thinking, like, with the reactive dog class, if you ever had, like, do you go over leash handling, like how to hold the leash?
Oh, yes.
Picture, like, equipment failure or something, and the leash slipping out of someone's hand.
Yeah, we actually would do how to hold the leash and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
For sure. And in fact, with some people who were fairly weak, we'd actually have them do 2 leashes, or hold so that we did that. Actually, would do that with big dogs, have 2 leashes on the dog. But people often hold the leash completely wrong.
Yeah.
So they don't hold it anything. The other thing a lot of trainers like is the waist leash. I don't like it, but I think that might be a prejudice of mine. I don't like it because I don't feel like I have any control. I think I need the tactile control. But some people like it a lot. And it certainly, if it works for them, I think it's great.
Or as a backup.
Yeah, it certainly as a backup, you could do it.
I have a client, she's a big bully, and she's basically, that's the only way she can walk her dog, and her dog has impulse control issues, but her center of gravity is very low, she's not very tall, and so she said that's the only way she can walk her dog, is clipped on.
Is the dog pulling on the clip-on leash?
Well, she has a front harness, but she's really, like, I hold her in my hand, but she's really strong, but
Because it worries me if she says that's the only way it would do it, is because if the dog is now pulling her, then the dog's behavior has not improved.
I agree.
It's just that she's not necessarily going to get pulled down by the
She's
dog.
not gonna get pulled down, so that's
Yeah.
the issue, the dog has many
Yeah.
issues.
I mean, I use waist leashes inside the house when you're trying to help a dog learn to be house trained that's an adult dog and stuff like that, because then a waist leash is very handy then. I just have problems with it, and I think that might be because I'm just so used to having a leash in my hand. It's hard for me not to. I think because I think of the leash as a communication device, and if it's around your waist, maybe this is it. If it's around your waist, it's not communicating; it's just a restraint device. But if it's in your hand, you actually, you're actually doing a lot with it to talk to the dog. So maybe that's it. I don't know.
Sometimes I think it's bad, because when I'm running with Mick, it's at the waist belt. I'm not yanking back when I see another dog. Or
So then it's good.
He's so much more relaxed.
Yeah.
It's not in my hand.
Yeah, hadn't thought of it that way, but yes, that's absolutely true. Anything else? Yeah.
I saw, it was in a seminar with Sue Sternberg last year, I think, and she was traveling around the country going to different shelters and bringing dogs out and kind of doing a quick evaluation on them and stuff. And someone happened to notice that she always kept a little bit of pressure on the leash and asked her about that. And she said she always wanted to be in contact with the dog, like not tight, but just so she could feel the dog, which was kind of interesting.
She's doing shelter dogs, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you're using a loose, a neck leash, I do not have control over my brain today. Yeah, a kennel leash. Then you always want to have a little bit of tautness in it. Always. It's very, very different from using a leash on a dog that is your own dog that you're training, and because those dogs you actually want them to feel that little slack, which is part of the communication. But when you're using a kennel leash, you need to have some tactile stuff because there's no relationship to speak of. So you need that little bit of tightness. And in fact, of course, you get a lot of it. It's not a lot of times because you're working a shelter dog. But even a little bit is really important. So I agree with her about that. Yeah. She does, and she definitely does. You saw her she was doing the evaluations again?
It was a video, yeah, she was going around picking dogs.
Well, dang. I thought she'd stopped doing that after she was being called the Nazi of all times. So, yeah, I'm very pleased. Huh?
There's some death threats.
She was getting death threats, yeah. So, So I'm really pleased that she is, because, well, the thing about Sue is that she told the truth. And what we're finding is that, you know, more and more dogs, actually, I just saw a couple of articles about it this week. More and more shelter dogs are injuring the people who adopt them. And that is because that the shelters are not doing their due diligence and not sussing out the dogs that are possibly dangerous. And you can never do it 100%, but there is a huge push to just adopt out dogs and kind of have it be buyer beware. And what Sue did is said, no, there are many dogs that cannot be rehomed. Even if they were good in one home, they may not be good in another home. And some dogs are just downright dangerous. And for that, she got death threats. And I was at her house once when she was getting them, and I said, Sue, why don't you turn your phone off and your email, and it was just awful. So yeah.
No, I was just gonna say that it's interesting because, you know, our shelter obviously does evaluations, but there's sometimes a disconnect based on the numbers, right, that the shelters wanna.
I know, they want 90% so they can be a no-kill shelter.
So there's often a disconnect between what we recommend and what the adoption staff, adoption volunteers, you know, enforce or
Mhm.
whatever, or they can sort of skip over certain things that they don't wanna focus on.
Yeah, I mean, there is a humongous amount of pressure on shelters to actually put up for adoption the vast majority of dogs that come into their shelter. And I understand it because we're in the business of rescuing dogs. But if you place a dog that's going to bite a child, you've done a horrible service to the dog by placing it in that family, to the family by having a dog that's aggressed against them, and to the shelter itself, where someone will never go adopt another dog from again.
Or shelter
And
dogs in general.
Huh?
People are then suspicious of shelter dogs in
Yeah, which is a reasonable thing for them to do. So doing that, I mean, there are lots of dogs that you can't tell with, and there are a lot of dogs that do much better over a long period of time and that can be placed over, you know, if you're careful about placing them. But this wholesale kind of, well, you know, buyer beware, obviously I disagree with that. I really do think that I think it's irresponsible. And I just think that we would all be better served if nothing else. The one thing that Marine Humane Society did that most shelters do not do that I really like, I don't know if they still do it, is they put the evaluation up on the run. So you get to see how the potential dog did on all these behavior tests.
That's really great.
Yeah.
Really, really great.
So that's extremely.
People do stop at the picture though, I mean.
They do,
don't always read
but
it.
at least
It's
it's
there
the-
if they want.
At least it's there.
Yeah,
At
they
least
would,
it's
they
there.
would see
Yeah.
food guarding, they'd see all of it, it's really good.
Yeah.
They do that at Peninsula as well. You can just hold a little sheet right.
And
can
you see the thing.
Yeah, and when you adopt a dog, they give you the notes. So we got so many notes with Fiona.
Yeah.
And anybody can write notes and say the dog did this today or whatever, and they do behavior assessments. And stuff like that.
Yeah. So and Peninsula does some really good behavior assessments. Some of the behavior assessments now are just like, oh, it looks cute.
Yeah.
There you go. That's it. So yeah, I mean, this is going to stay a controversial topic for a long time to come, because there's the mooring parties here, and but there's the public, which are the people who end up adopting the animals, and those are the people who are the ultimate victims, or the lucky recipients of a great animal, you know. Okay, you guys, was this a good class? Was this okay? All right, so again, I'll send you the link to the actual class, and we'll see you next time.